Greetings to all. I, Animesh Upadhyay, along with my co-host Mudit Ahuja, are back with yet another episode of the Law Cultures of the Desk. In this episode, we'll discuss about access to justice amidst lockdown and COVID crisis. And to throw the light on the issue hand in hand, we have esteemed guest, the woman who is currently Additional Solicitor General of India, and she has also parted in many landmark cases like validity of Aadhaar card, constitutional validity of religious practices of Muslim personal law, equal rights for women in short service commission and Air Force. She is none other than Senior Advocate Aishwarya Bhati, ma'am. Ma'am, it's an honor for us that you spared time from your extremely busy schedule.
Ma'am, a very warm welcome to you. Ma'am, today it's a proud moment for all of us from the behalf of the Law Culture team. Ma'am, coincidentally, we also share the same hometown, that is Jodhpur. Ma'am, without any further ado, I would like to move towards the theme of the today's interaction. Ma'am, you see, ma'am, that there have been a lot of allegations that were raised by many former judges as well as the scholars amidst this COVID crisis against the Supreme Court that that the fundamental rights have been in a stage of lockdown and that the courts have also been in a stage of lockdown. Ma'am, my question was strictly pertaining to the fact that, ma'am, whether do you think that this strategy that was adopted by the Supreme Court, it was the best possible strategy, or like the Supreme Court could have come up with a better viable solution?
So, Vande Mataram, Jai Hind to all of you. Thank you very much. It's indeed a privilege for me to be here. I always love interacting with law students.
Yes,
and yes, added advantage to know, Mudit, that you and I come from the same hometown. Jodhpur is a very special place. See, let me remind you of one thing that recently, one of our legal doyens, somebody that the whole country is proud of. In fact, he's a Padma Bhushan also. Mr. Harish Salve had said something very interesting in one of his speeches. He said, it's interesting how Supreme Court has become the national dartboard. Everyone wants to throw darts on Supreme Court, and also highlighted that, we all must respect our institutions because our institutions have to work. You're right. In recent times, we saw a lot of scathing attack. And while the activists took cognizance of it, but others also saw how it was. The judgment that has come yesterday on the contempt petition of Mr. Prashant Bhushan, that judgment has some very interesting data. I want to read that data out to you from the judgment of Supreme Court from yesterday, where they say that from March 23rd till August 4th, various benches of Supreme Court have been sitting regularly and discharging their duties through video conferencing. During this period, the court has heard 12,748 cases. In this period, the court has dealt with 686 writ petitions, including many PILs. The judgment goes on, of course, but this data is very interesting because even I did not know that, this was the data that is there. COVID-19, yes, it's a pandemic. It is the first of its kind that we are seeing in our generation. We see similarities in conversation about it from the Spanish flu that happened almost 100 years back. So in nobody's memory and nobody's lifetime can anybody claim of having seen something like this. But we have seen how the countries world over have grappled with it. Countries who are apparently countries which have the best medical infrastructure in the world, how those countries have dealt with it, how the developed countries have dealt with it, how countries where liberty, justice, equity, these are the hallmarks of from where the other constitutions, including India, has taken, how those countries have dealt with it. We have seen the protests going on, on wearing of masks, on privacy issues, on all kinds of issues that have happened. We have to understand that we are in a world pandemic situation. Nobody is happy in this. Nobody is in this by their own volition. This is a situation that has that I don't know, nature has thrown on us, and how we react to it is important. Now let us assess objectively whether Supreme Court has reacted to the situation properly or not. Immediately after the Supreme Court reopened after the Holy break, that week was a week that we had physical courts, we had alternate courts, because the medical guidance was already there. The expert medical opinion was already there that we shouldn't have crowding. Of course, we have become wiser slowly over, not us, but as in our medical community, and our experts have also gotten wiser, because initially it was like an invisible enemy. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew how to deal with it. And slowly we have learned from each other, watching different countries grapple with it, and our own country also, our experiences have made us wiser. So first week was that physical opening, and after that the lockdown happened. Now this figure that I just gave you from the judgment of yesterday, 12,748 cases, out of which the writ petitions itself are 686. Compare it with the data anywhere else in the world, and you will realize that it is, it is an overwhelming number of cases that have been heard. Yes, the courts everywhere have been working at much lower capacity. After all, we expect everything to go on hunky-dory. We don't realize that a medical pandemic, there are people on the other side also. They also need to work, and everyone is working on expert medical opinions. So in my well-considered opinion, of course, I am a very young lawyer in the institution. That's the beauty of this institution. You may be in your mid-40s, but you continue to be a young lawyer for the institution. But in my small, humble opinion, I think the institution has reacted as well as it could, as efficiently and efficaciously as it could. Of course, we live in a free country. We don't have to. We enjoy freedom of speech and expression. Many of us just go on the Article 19(1)(a). Nobody wants to go to Article 19(2), where the responsibilities lie, where the restrictions lie, and those restrictions are very well defined. So the fact that in such a pandemic, the courts of justice did not shut its doors and allowed matters to be heard, urgent mentionings, urgent issues. There were all kinds of matters that were filed and were taken up. Anything related to COVID related issues were taken up on priority, whether those matters were ultimately dismissed as opinionated or seeking mandamus on executive issues or having some ideas about governance. In one of the matters, Supreme Court even mentioned that everyone who has any idea about how to run the country is filing a PIL. That's not how PIL was envisaged. But I feel that we need to understand the statistics clearly, and we need to understand that our institution has responded as well as it could in the extremely difficult situation that was thrown at us.
That's very good.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, one peculiar issue of concern, although strictly not related to present times, ma'am, access to justice connotes access to equal justice for all. To ensure that this is one of the primary duties of the state under Article 39A. We see that the fees charged by lawyers, not just the Supreme Court, but other high courts as well, has reached astronomical numbers. Do you think this phenomenon is thwarting the idea of justice for the middle and poor class? And also, does this issue needs to be addressed by the topmost court?
So Animeshji, you mentioned Article 39A. You should be aware that in 1987, a law was passed, which is the Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987. Correct. We often forget that, just to put it in perspective, in 1970s, the whole idea of public interest litigation was coined, expounded, allowed in India by the very legendary judges of our legendary Supreme Court. And the whole idea in the decade of 70s was that access to justice was not available to the masses. Otherwise, traditionally, litigation has a very strict concept of locus standi. And that is a fundamental principle that is followed not just in India, but that's one of the most fundamental legal concepts, that anyone who doesn't have locus standi cannot come to the court. PIL is a aberration to that principle of locus standi, but still it was recognized because it was felt that social economic justice to masses would not be possible unless access to justice is given to all. Now, 1987 was a landmark year in the coming of this act of the Legal Services Authority Act. Of course, it has taken a little time to expand its scope, but today, I must tell you, I have been a legal aid volunteer lawyer for almost now almost 2 decades, and I have seen firsthand how effectively and efficiently this works. At the national level, we have the National Legal Services Authority, NALSA, that we know as. The head of that is the Chief Justice of our country. Chief Justice of India is the executive chair, ex officio chairperson of that. Then you have executive chairperson, who's a number 2 or number 3 seniority judge of the Supreme Court. There are very efficient senior judges, senior lawyers who are part of that committee. They are very efficient district judges. This same mechanism is available at every state. So there are state legal services authorities which are headed by the Chief Justice of that state. It includes some senior judges, senior lawyers, senior district judges. The mechanism is, there are huge funds that are coming in this. The funds that are coming in this are enough to cater to every litigation that comes in through these. Now, these authorities are now from the state level, they have percolated down to every district court of the country. Today, every district of the country has a legal services authority. Now, in fact, now many municipal courts also have it. Not all, I will say, but all district courts have it. And it is very easy. Everyone who is of lower than a particular economic strength can go there and can have access to good lawyers, good briefings, and good consultation. Consultation is available for everyone. And if you are below a particular economic line, then you get entire case done for you by competent lawyers free of charge. You don't even have to pay the mandatory court fees, the typing charges, or those welfare stamps, etc. Even those are exempt for them. Now this, in addition to one more thing, there is a new, it's not really new now. This has also been existing for over a decade. There is another level which has been added to this, is a middle income level legal aid society. Because it was felt that something must be available to middle income also. So these are very effective, we need to have more awareness of this so that more and more people come and avail of their rights. This is a statutory mechanism, constitutional mandate, then in a statute, and huge amounts of funds are coming here for awareness programs, for consultations, for making sure. And for middle income group societies, you have to pay a very nominal amount. Maybe, it ranges depending on the kind of matter, but it ranges between 10, 15, 20,000 rupees. That's the amount of money that somebody has to pay even for a case in the Supreme Court of the country. So it is very nominal charges. I think people should avail of these. Sometimes people come to me that, they say that we often don't get good lawyers through that legal aid committee, which is a wrong notion. In fact, it is a matter of privilege for lawyers to be volunteer lawyers in the legal aid societies. People should avail of that more. And yes, you are right, for professionals, the fees have become astronomical. They have become astronomical, increasingly so. And we have seen that in some places, the fees are so, they're so excessive that it is impossible for any common citizen to really, even an affluent citizen to be able to afford those kind of fees. I do understand that is definitely there, but please also understand that litigation works slightly differently. There is no embargo at the entry level. Anyone who has a degree and is enrolled with the Bar Council can come and practice law. Ultimately, what is your professional competence is what defines how you are. And let me tell you, even these lawyers who charge seemingly astronomical fees, even they do a lot of pro bono work. Even they do a lot of amicus matters. Even they do a lot of legal aid briefs. So it is not that it is not being done, but where the clients are able to afford big fees, why shouldn't the professionals get the fees that they work very hard for? So yes, the fees are very high, but at the same time, the access to justice is not hindered for anyone. It is freely available through the legal aid services authorities. and that should be availed of.
I'm glad that covers all the points. I'm now coming to the point of access to justice now. Amit said that it is the very essence of our democracy that access to justice should be free and in a transparent manner. I'm now coming to the issue that was raised by the former judges of the Supreme Court back in 2018 regarding the arbitrary or the questionable mentioning of matters and allocation of matters and constitution of benches and Chief Justice exercising his power of the master of the roster. Do you think that this issue that was raised was a huge blow to the institution, and this has gotten little attention, and whether this power of Chief Justice as master of the roster should be shared like the way it is done in the collegium system when the Chief Justice exercises his power of appointing the judges?
So Muditji, what happened in the press conference? I mean, the press conference itself was a very unprecedented occasion. It was the first time that something like that happened in the history of our existence as a democratic republic. So yes, we were, as students of law who practice law in that court, we were quite shaken up or stirred up. It was shocking also in many ways. But then I think that's the beauty of our country. I think we have these systems of checks and balances. We have, we have opportunities available for, for things to be brought up, to be red flagged in multiple mechanisms. Though I would have rather had that it was discussed as an in-house mechanism, because Supreme Court is not just one judge or one Chief Justice. Supreme Court consists of, now the strength of Supreme Court is 36. So the Supreme Court consists of all of them, and all of them have equal judicial powers. And when the full court sits, they decide issues of very, very, significant importance for the justice delivery mechanism for the entire country. And they take those decisions. Collegium, of course, is a much smaller composition depending on whether the appointment is for High Court or Supreme Court. It consists of either first 5 judges or first 3 judges. Having said that, I would also highlight one more thing before you, that it's not like, for this we are saying master of roster should not be Chief Justice. There is a huge amount of criticism that even the collegium system has come under. So it's not like collegium system has not come under scathing attacks and scrutiny for the core purpose that it was formulated by a judgment. This collegium system is not from the Constitution. It is a product of the judgment of the Supreme Court. And for the first, people often say that till 1990s, before the collegium system was there, the judges who were appointed for the first 4 decades in our country, they were no lesser than what collegium system has appointed after the 1990s, maybe even better, some would say. But any system or any seat or any institution will always only be as good as the person who's manning that system. I think I'm not talking about you youngsters, but my generation has been a generation of a very impatient generation on some accounts. We have been a generation of instant coffee, instant noodles, instant love at first sight, instant earning, instant work, instant, getting everything upfront. And not just Indians. I think that it was a generational thing that we had. And in that, impatience for some particular things, we also became very forthright in expressing our views over just about anything without really understanding the whole dynamics or the entire factual basis of that. But I think time has come for the next generation and us together with you guys, that we need to assess that, whether the criticism is of institutions or whether the criticism is of particular persons who are manning those institutions at that time. And how much is enough? I mean, is there a line that needs to be drawn? yes, I mean, in India, we enjoy our liberties to some of the fullest extents anywhere in the world. I often, give this example that if you were to do Google search of Winnie the Pooh in China, you can't find it, because the Winnie the Pooh, then the result will be, of course, A, they don't have Google. B, whatever is their search engine, if you search, it says this, the content is banned by the local laws. In Chinese, they say that. And why? Because Winnie the Pooh, by some critiques,
Correct.
I don't know if they have the equivalents of R.K. Lakshman in China, but some probably critiques did make these, these cartoons, showing a similarity between that affable Disney character of Winnie the Pooh with the premier of China, and you can't see it anymore. So we often don't realize what we have if we don't compare with countries around us. And it's not just China. I'm giving an extreme example. France has been in a debate of whether to ban face, not the COVID masks, but the face veils, head scarves. There is a huge debate that has been raising for the last 5 years over these issues. And of course, these are peculiar to a particular religious identity. So these debates have been going on in those cultures also with regard to how much. I think what is important is we need to have a balance between rights and responsibilities. We have become too focused on our rights without realizing our responsibilities. Ultimately, if we are attacking our system so much, Chief Justice should not be master of the roster, Collegium should not be doing this, Supreme Court is all bad, Supreme Court is full of this kind of judges and they're not doing proper justice. What are we doing? Do we want lawlessness? Do we want our citizens to sort out their differences on the roadside? What are we getting at? We are attacking the very rule of law. How much criticism before it becomes destruction of those institutions? Whether that criticism is fair and constructive, or whether that criticism is malicious and destructive, that is something that we will have to start asking questions about, because we can't destroy our institutions. I mean, look at where we are today as a country compared to our position in the world. It is our constitution, and it is the chief interpreter of our constitution, the Supreme Court, and the entire theory of checks and balances in our system, which has allowed us to become who we are as a country. Though we do like to become better, we aspire to become better, but let's not lose what we have gained.
Correct, ma'am.
Correct, ma'am. Correct. That covers most of the points, ma'am. But this similar issue was raised by Mr. Shanti Bhushan, who is an eminent lawyer in the Supreme Court, in the case of Shanti Bhushan versus the Union of India, wherein he raised the issue that this matter of allocation of matters and constitution of benches should be exercised by the Chief Justice in his capacity of not an individual, rather a collegium. Ma'am, the court dismissed that petition, saying that this is of no regard, and the Chief Justice, for the efficient functioning of the court, should be exercising this power solely. Ma'am, in this case, I've read the judgment, and there was little to no regard of the press conference. And ma'am, when such an attack is made on an institution which is built on the faith of the people, faith of its citizens, and do you think it is essential for the Supreme Court to say render that we don't work like that, or to just manifestly just deny that rather? Because
I've noticed that judges don't hold press conferences. This was one aberration. Apart from that, they don't speak on media. Even when attacks happen on them personally and institutionally, they don't come back to media to defend it, or they don't speak about it at all. The only way they communicate, the only option that is open for them and available for them is to speak through their judgments. There is a very sacrosanct, pious, divine job that they are doing of dispensation of justice. Best of the lawyers, who we regard as, like doyens of the legal profession, Mr. Shanti Bhushan, Mr. Ram Jethmalani, Mr. Fali Nariman, they're people who are gods, Soli Sorabji, and the generation before us, which, I mean, I haven't seen Mr. Palkiwala, but we've read about him. Amazing people who have, who inspire amazing respect from the whole country. But when they are arguing matters, they are holding a brief. They will make arguments which the brief of the matter requires. Their job is to assist the dispensation of justice, but they are essentially the spokesperson or the mouthpieces of their own clients or their own briefs in a particular manner. Judges are bound by the constitutional oath. Judges are bound by the divine job that they are doing. Lawyers never take any constitutional oaths. I mean, even if I'm arguing an indefendible case, even if I'm arguing the case of a client that I don't believe in, my professional ethics bind me to do the best that I can to ensure that he gets the proper rule of law is followed in his case. But I will argue in even an indefensible case with the vehemence that it deserves to be argued. Correct. Judges are not like that. They are on the other side. So for us to get swayed by lawyers when they are making arguments, no matter what is their, otherwise in society, what is their stature, for us to get swayed on what they have argued, you have to bear in mind that there is a constitution bench judgment which recognizes the role of the Chief Justice of India as master of the roster.
Correct.
So it is not one lawyer, no matter what his status in society is, or the legal profession is, one lawyer arguing that is not proper. Ultimately, the constitution envisages that what the Supreme Court says is going to be the law of the land, not what a particular lawyer argues in a particular case. And it was not that one case alone. There's a constitution bench judgment, like I said. The press conference, though unwarranted completely in my opinion, but it did lead to a roster being published and followed in Supreme Court, which was something that was done only in high courts before. Up to high courts, Supreme Court did not have a published roster, but that has started happening. So some corrections have happened, but I feel that we have to have institutional respect. And if we like I said, I mean, ultimately what's at stake here, if we erode institutional respect, is the very faith of a common citizen in rule of law. After that press conference, I can tell you, many of my clients, ordinary clients, landlord-tenant matters, matrimonial matters, they started asking questions like, should we go to this bench? Oh, he was part of the Judge Saab was part of the press conference. Judge Saab was not part of the press conference. How do you think it will impact our case? And I realized that the damage is so much, because what is ultimately at the center of this entire edifice of judiciary? The center of it is just justice dispensation to the common citizen. If we erode his faith in the institution, then all of such acts which erode our faith in that institution, no matter who does it, are nibbling away on the huge temple of justice, and that is unacceptable.
Correct, ma'am. Very correct.
Ma'am, as we all know that you have achieved so much at a young age, and many professionals of our fraternity idolize you. It would be really grateful if you could say a few words to guide and advise them.
Animesh ji, firstly, I'm not so young and really anymore. But yes, I have been very fortunate, and I started my journey from Jodhpur. Mudit knows how Jodhpur is. It's a beautiful Marwar town, which is called the gateway of the Thar Desert. I completed my legal education from there, LLB, BSc, LLB, LLM I did there. And though law was not my first choice, I actually wanted to be a pilot. I was a solo glider pilot, and best cadet in NCC, commanded the Rajasthan contingent, went to Canada in a youth exchange. So, sorry?
That's very nice, ma'am. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So that was in the college years. So I was so overwhelmed with that life in uniform and flying, and I had done over 100 sorties in the glider. That used to fascinate me. And when you are a young girl, I mean, best thing about this age is that you are dreamers. And though I have kept a part of being a dreamer with me, but unfortunately, I failed the pilot aptitude test when I went to give it, and it came as a shock to me because I felt that how could I lose something that I've been doing so well? But my elder brother has been my friend, philosopher, and guide, my mentor, really, mentor in life and mentor in profession. He was already a lawyer. He After this, I mean, he saw how dejected I felt. He said, "Come, law is a very interesting profession. Why don't you try this out, and maybe you'll like it." Because he knew I was a debater and I used to argue unnecessarily over everything, question everything, curious about everything. So he focused me into law, and my mother, who's the driving force of my life, supported. I had always every freedom. I mean, though coming from a very traditional community, a very traditional town, I had the freedoms that I enjoyed. That was all thanks to my mother, to follow and pursue anything I wanted. So then I took admission in law, but somewhere I felt that, okay, I'm loving this, but I don't want to practice in Jodhpur, High Court, District Court. No, I want to go to the highest court of the country and practice there only. So somewhere this became the second dream. And the moment I finished my law, I came to Supreme Court and I started practicing here. And that time, I did not know how life would be. I just, from a small town, a girl with lots of dreams came to Supreme Court. I was also, early years of the profession, I was already married when I came to the profession. Early years of the profession, I became a mother. So it was challenging times, very, very difficult times. It's difficult to survive in Delhi also when you're not a Delhiite. I lived in Gurgaon for 15, 16 years and used to commute from there with my two little children bundled up on my side. So for women, the struggle is much more. Initial years, struggle is there for every lawyer. I had a strong support of my family, my mother, my brother, and then, slowly my children also. So I had strong support from family, but it was a lot of hard work for many years. And once once you work hard with sincerity and honesty, you get so many helping hands. It's not funny. It's amazing how many helping hands you can get. I never had I would say the luxury of joining any senior's office. So like you guys, you all follow that I'll intern there and, work there and belong to that chamber. I did not have that luxury because I was a mother of young children when I was a young lawyer. I couldn't afford to have that. I mean, it was good enough that I was finding time to come to court on miscellaneous days. For full 2 years, a year and a half, I used to come to court only on miscellaneous days. That was Monday and Friday. I couldn't afford to come on other days. I had too much work and of being a mother. But so I could not join a chamber. But I'm telling you, you don't, the court corridors are such amazing learning places. They are like the best of the Ivy League colleges of the world. What does it take? I mean, when I was a young lawyer, I saw Arun Jaitley Saab, late Arun Jaitley Saab used to be one of the stalwarts of Supreme Court. You just follow him, go wherever he's going. Knowledge is everywhere. You go and see how he is arguing, how he addresses the court. Mr. Salve, Mr. Salve has been a huge influence in my life. And I've never worked in his office, nobody's office for that matter. But once I did have the occasion to tell Mr. Salve this, and I told him that in addition to the many Arjunas that you would have groomed in your own chamber, there are many Eklavyas who have learned from you. And I am one such Eklavya who has learned from you. So we see that in our mythology also, there are, in our religious texts also, you don't have to, the guru need not take you. If you take somebody as your guru, you're good enough. And you get amazing helping hands, so many people, there to help you out, assist you from the bench. From the bench, you got so much assistance, judges who saw that you wanted to work, they would appoint you as amicus in matters because they were undefended matters. I mean, if you didn't have work. So it has been a beautiful journey. Somewhere you just roll on with honesty and dedication, and, the universe finds a way for you.
Correct, ma'am.
I'm glad. That's very good.
So, thanks a lot for sparing time for us. And we know how busy you are. So, it's an honor to have you with us. So that's all for today's episode, and we'll be back with another episode. Till then, please like, share, and subscribe The Law Culture, and please do visit our site www.thelawculture.in for more legal updates. Thank you, ma'am.
It was an
Thank you so much,
absolute
Acharia, ma'am.
privilege and honor to be here with you guys.
Thank you
And
so much.
we had very
Thank you.
candid conversation. Many issues you asked me, and I tried to be as candid as I could. I
Yes,
hope
ma'am.
it was.
Ma'am, it was
Your love
insightful.
for the institution was really good.
Yes, ma'am.
Trust and love for the institution is really good and really appreciate.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you so
Bye.
much, ma'am. Thank you so much. Happy Independence Day, ma'am.
Happy
Happy Independence
Independence
Day,
Day. Vande Mataram. Jai Hind.
Vande
Bye.
Mataram. Jai Hind. Bye bye.